The sound of champagne glasses clinking together echoed softly through the first-class cabin as the passengers settled into their plush, oversized seats. Among them was Greg, a brash businessman in his late 40s, whose tailored suit and polished loafers screamed affluence. Greg thrived on being the center of attention, whether in the boardroom or on a flight. His loud voice, accompanied by a booming laugh, often drew curious glances or annoyed scowls from those around him. Today was no exception. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. As the flight attendant handed him a glass of chilled champagne, Greg reclined his seat with an exaggerated sigh of satisfaction. His eyes darted around the cabin, assessing the other passengers. A young woman seated 2 rows ahead immediately caught his attention. She had on a simple hoodie and jeans, her blonde hair tucked under a baseball cap. She kept her head low, scrolling through her phone with one hand while adjusting her sunglasses with the other. She looked oddly familiar, but Greg couldn't place her. Probably just some Instagram wannabe, he muttered under his breath. The first hour of the flight passed uneventfully, with Greg entertaining himself by regaling the older couple next to him with stories of his self-proclaimed business genius. Every so often, his eyes would flicker back to the mysterious woman in the hoodie. She hadn't taken off her sunglasses even after the cabin lights dimmed. Intrigued and a little irritated by her aloofness, Greg decided she needed to be brought down a peg or two. He unbuckled his seatbelt and strolled up the aisle, stopping abruptly at her seat. Leaning casually against the armrest, he cleared his throat. "You know," he began, his tone dripping with feigned kindness, "first-class passengers usually dress a little more appropriately. Didn't anyone tell you this isn't coach?" The woman looked up, startled, her lips parting as if to say something, but she quickly closed them again. Greg smirked, taking her silence as an invitation to continue. "Not trying to be rude, sweetheart," he said, gesturing at her outfit, "but if you're going to splurge on a first-class ticket, you might as well make an effort to fit in. Just some friendly advice." The woman tilted her head slightly, her sunglasses reflecting Greg's smug expression. Her hands remained folded neatly in her lap, and she didn't respond. Her silence only emboldened him further. "Or maybe you're just here on a free upgrade," he said with a chuckle, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Lucky you. Enjoy it while it lasts, huh?" Before she could respond, a flight attendant approached Greg with a polite but firm smile. "Sir, if you'd please return to your seat. We're about to serve dinner." Greg gave the woman one last smirk before retreating. As he sauntered back to his seat, he noticed several passengers giving him disapproving glances. Unbothered, he shrugged them off. "Some people can't handle the truth," he muttered to himself. An hour later, as the cabin lights dimmed for the night, Greg noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The flight attendant seemed unusually attentive to the woman in the hoodie, addressing her with a level of respect and care that puzzled him. At one point, one of them brought her a cup of tea and asked if she needed anything else, using the kind of tone reserved for VIP passengers. Greg's curiosity got the better of him. Leaning over to the older gentleman seated beside him, he whispered, "Do you have any idea who that woman is?" The man raised an eyebrow. "You don't recognize her?" "No," Greg said, annoyed. "Should I?" The man chuckled softly. "That's Taylor Swift." Greg froze. The words hung in the air, sinking into his chest like a lead weight. His eyes darted back to the woman, and suddenly it all made sense. The sunglasses, the hoodie, the quiet demeanor. How could he have missed it? He had spent the last 5 minutes insulting one of the most famous and influential artists in the world. His heart raced as panic set in. Taylor Swift wasn't just any celebrity. She was an international superstar, a household name with millions of fans and a reputation for class and grace. And Greg had humiliated her in front of an entire cabin of passengers. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had made a colossal mistake. Greg spent the next few minutes in a state of internal turmoil, debating whether he should apologize. Part of him wanted to stay in his seat and pretend nothing had happened, but another part knew he couldn't let this slide. If word got out about his behavior, and it inevitably would, his reputation would be in shambles. Summoning his courage, Greg rose from his seat and made his way back to Taylor's row. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable behind her sunglasses. "Miss Swift," he began awkwardly, his voice trembling slightly, I just wanted to apologize. I didn't realize who you were. I was out of line." Taylor tilted her head, considering him for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. You didn't know who I was, and yet you thought it was okay to judge me based on my appearance? Greg opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. Taylor continued, her tone measured but cutting. It's not about who I am. It's about treating people with respect, regardless of how they're dressed or where they're sitting. Everyone deserves to be here just as much as you do. Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Greg felt the weight of his arrogance pressing down on him, and for the first time in years, he was genuinely ashamed of himself. I'm so sorry, he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. You're absolutely right. Taylor nodded, her expression softening slightly. Apology accepted. Just think before you speak next time. Greg returned to his seat, his face burning with humiliation. For the rest of the flight, he avoided eye contact with anyone, sinking as low as he could in his chair. He couldn't stop replaying the incident in his mind, cringing at his own behavior. When the plane landed, Greg watched as Taylor was escorted off the aircraft by a discreet security team, her presence drawing whispers and stares from other passengers. He felt a pang of regret, not because he had embarrassed himself, but because he had failed to embody the basic decency she had spoken of. In the weeks that followed, Greg couldn't shake the memory of the flight. He found himself reevaluating his interactions with others, questioning the superiority complex that had guided him for so long. Slowly but surely, he began to change. He made an effort to listen more and judge less, to treat everyone, regardless of their status or appearance, with the respect they deserved. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And though Greg would never forget the humiliation of that first-class flight, he would always be grateful for the lesson he had learned. Because sometimes it takes a moment of reckoning to remind us of what truly matters. As Greg left the airport that fateful day, he felt an unshakable weight on his chest. Though Taylor Swift's words had been delivered with grace, their impact had been profound, cutting through his bravado like a scalpel. In his heart, he knew this moment would haunt him for a long time. Not because he'd insulted a celebrity, but because he had been exposed, not just to her but to himself, for what he truly was, a man too comfortable with his arrogance. The drive home was unusually quiet for Greg. Normally, he would take calls or rehearse sales pitches during his commute, but today he kept the radio off, preferring silence to the hum of pop hits that might remind him of her. As he pulled into the driveway of his suburban mansion, he glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time, he didn't like the man staring back at him. The following days were a struggle. At work, he found himself distracted, fumbling during meetings, and snapping less frequently at his subordinates. He tried to brush it off as jet lag, but deep down, he knew better. Taylor's words had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, a quiet but persistent question. Was he truly the person he wanted to be? Greg's colleagues began to notice the change. At first, it was subtle. He started greeting the receptionist by name and asking the janitorial staff how their day was going. He no longer cut people off during brainstorming sessions or dominated conversations with tales of his accomplishments. The shift wasn't instant, but it was steady, as though he were shedding a skin he no longer wished to wear. One night, unable to sleep, Greg found himself scrolling through Taylor Swift's discography. He had always dismissed her music as teenage fluff, a label he now realized was both unfair and ignorant. Clicking play on one of her albums, he was struck by the depth of her lyrics. Themes of resilience, heartbreak, and self-reflection poured through his headphones, resonating with emotions he had buried long ago. Her music felt like a mirror, reflecting truths he had avoided for years. As the weeks turned into months, Greg decided to take his introspection further. He began attending workshops on emotional intelligence and empathy, topics he would have scoffed at in his earlier days. These sessions opened his eyes to the ways his behavior had impacted others, not just on that flight, but throughout his life. He thought of the countless times he had dismissed someone based on their appearance, silenced their voice in a meeting, or made them feel small with a careless remark. The memories were painful, but they fueled his determination to change. Greg's transformation didn't go unnoticed. At work, his colleagues found themselves warming to this new version of him. The younger employees, who had once dreaded his criticism, now sought his mentorship. Even his boss, a no-nonsense executive with little patience for egos, complimented Greg on his newfound humility. For the first time in years, Greg felt a sense of fulfillment that had nothing to do with his bank account or job title. But it wasn't just his professional life that improved. At home, Greg's relationship with his teenage daughter Emily took a turn for the better. Emily, an avid Taylor Swift fan, had grown distant from her father over the years, finding him too busy and too judgmental to connect with. When Greg sheepishly admitted he had met Taylor Swift on a flight and made a fool of himself, Emily's eyes widened in shock. "Wait, you met her? And you insulted her?" Emily's voice was equal parts disbelief and dismay. Greg nodded, his face red with shame. "I didn't know it was her at the time, but that's no excuse. I shouldn't have spoken to anyone that way." To his surprise, Emily didn't lash out. Instead, she looked at him thoughtfully. Did she say anything back? Greg recounted the conversation, omitting none of the details. When he finished, Emily nodded slowly. "That sounds like her. She's always been about standing up for yourself and being kind, even when people don't deserve it." Greg felt a lump in his throat. "I've been a lousy dad, haven't I?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "You've been distant. And yeah, sometimes you say things that hurt without realizing it. But if you're trying to change, that's a good start." Her words gave Greg hope. Over the next few months, he made an effort to bridge the gap between them. He listened to her talk about school, her favorite TV shows, and even her love for Taylor Swift's music. One evening, Emily invited him to watch a documentary about Taylor's life and career. Sitting on the couch together, Greg found himself in awe of the woman he had once dismissed so easily. The film showcased her tireless work ethic, her philanthropic efforts, and the genuine connection she had with her fans. It was a humbling reminder of how wrong he had been. Greg's journey of self-improvement eventually led him to take part in community outreach programs. He volunteered at local shelters and mentorship programs where he met people from all walks of life. Listening to their stories, he realized how much he had taken for granted. These experiences deepened his empathy and reinforced his commitment to treating everyone with dignity. One day, Greg received an email that left him speechless. It was an invitation to attend a charity gala hosted by none other than Taylor Swift. The event aimed to raise funds for educational programs and featured an exclusive performance by Taylor herself. Greg was unsure why he had been invited, but he suspected it had something to do with the flight attendants who had witnessed his transformation during the flight months ago. The night of the gala was a whirlwind. Dressed in a sleek tuxedo, Greg mingled with celebrities, philanthropists, and fans, all gathered for a common cause. When Taylor took the stage, the room erupted into applause. Her performance was breathtaking, her voice filling the space with a raw, emotional power that left the audience spellbound. After the performance, Greg was surprised to find himself face to face with Taylor once again. She approached him with a warm smile, extending her hand. "Mr. Adams," she said, her tone friendly but teasing. "I hear you've been busy since our last encounter." Greg laughed nervously, shaking her hand. "Miss Swift, I can't thank you enough for everything. You didn't just call me out. You changed my life." Taylor's smile widened. "I didn't change your life, you did. I just gave you a nudge." Greg nodded, humbled by her words. "Even so, I owe you an apology, a proper one this time. What I said to you on that flight was unacceptable, and I'm deeply sorry." Taylor studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Apology accepted. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you turned it into something positive." Their conversation was brief but meaningful. As Taylor moved on to greet other guests, Greg felt a profound sense of closure. The man who had boarded that flight months ago was unrecognizable compared to the one standing in that ballroom. He had learned to value kindness over appearances, humility over arrogance, and connection over status. In the years that followed, Greg continued his journey of growth. He became an advocate for workplace inclusivity, using his platform to elevate the voices of those who had been overlooked. His relationship with Emily flourished, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. And while he never became a die-hard Swiftie like his daughter, he remained a quiet admirer of Taylor Swift, the woman who had shown him the power of grace, authenticity, and second chances. Greg often thought back to that flight, not with regret but with gratitude. It was a turning point, a moment of reckoning that had set him on a path toward becoming the person he had always aspired to be. And though he never sought recognition for his transformation, he hoped that in some small way, his story might inspire others to look beyond their own biases and see the humanity in everyone they encountered. After all, as Taylor herself had said, it's not about who I am, it's about treating people with respect. And for Greg, those words had become a guiding light, a simple truth that changed everything. The plane incident and its aftermath marked the beginning of Greg's transformation, but his journey was far from complete. Growth, he discovered, wasn't a destination but an ongoing process, a continuous effort to better understand himself and others. Over time, Greg came to see that the flight and his encounter with Taylor Swift were not just isolated moments of humiliation, but a part of a much larger story, a wake-up call to live with integrity and empathy. This new perspective reshaped his priorities in ways he couldn't have anticipated. In the months following the gala, Greg took a step back from his hectic schedule and reevaluated his approach to life. His days had long been consumed by work, wealth, and the pursuit of external validation, but he now realized that these pursuits left him feeling empty. For the first time, he began to ask himself what truly mattered. Greg started with small changes. He took mornings off to walk through the local park, something he hadn't done since moving to the area years ago. The simple act of being outdoors, breathing in fresh air and observing the world around him, brought a sense of peace he hadn't realized he was missing. He made an effort to greet strangers with a smile, hold doors open, and engage in small acts of kindness, not for recognition, but because it felt right. At work, Greg's newfound mindfulness began to influence his leadership style. He started hosting weekly check-ins with his team, not to critique their performance, but to listen. He encouraged open dialogue and invited input from everyone, including those who were usually overlooked. Greg discovered that some of his most innovative ideas came from employees he had once dismissed as quiet or inexperienced. Empowering others to share their voices became one of his greatest joys. One of the most impactful changes came in the form of philanthropy. Inspired by the gala he had attended, Greg began exploring ways to give back to the community. His first project was funding a scholarship program for underprivileged youth in the city where he'd grown up. Greg had often boasted about his humble beginnings, but in truth, he had lost touch with the challenges faced by those still living in poverty. Visiting the neighborhoods he once called home was a humbling experience, one that reignited his desire to make a difference. The scholarship program quickly grew into a full-fledged foundation dedicated to education and mentorship. Greg worked tirelessly to ensure its success, reaching out to former colleagues and connections in the business world to secure funding and resources. What surprised him most was how many people were eager to join the cause. It seemed that Greg's transformation had inspired others to reevaluate their own priorities, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond his personal journey. One day, while visiting a school that had benefited from his foundation's support, Greg was approached by a shy teenage girl named Mia. She thanked him for the scholarship that had allowed her to stay in school and pursue her dream of becoming a writer. As she spoke, Greg was struck by her determination and resilience, qualities that reminded him of Taylor Swift's unwavering commitment to her craft and her fans. Mia's gratitude moved him deeply, and he resolved to do everything in his power to ensure that more young people like her had the opportunity to thrive. Back at home, Greg's relationship with his daughter Emily continued to flourish. Their shared love of music became a cornerstone of their bond. Emily introduced Greg to new artists and genres, while he shared his own favorite songs from his youth. Together, they attended concerts and music festivals, experiences that brought them closer than ever. Greg even surprised Emily with tickets to one of Taylor Swift's shows, a gesture that left her speechless. The concert was a revelation for Greg. Watching Taylor perform live, he was struck by her ability to connect with every member of the audience, from the screaming fans in the front row to the parents sitting further back. Her lyrics, once dismissed as frivolous, now resonated with him on a deeply personal level. Songs about love, loss, and self-discovery took on new meaning as he reflected on his own journey. By the end of the night, Greg was on his feet, cheering alongside Emily and the thousands of other fans. As the years went by, Greg's transformation became a defining aspect of his legacy. Friends and colleagues often marveled at the change they had witnessed, and Greg made no effort to hide the catalyst for his growth. He spoke openly about the flight and the lesson Taylor Swift had taught him, using the story to encourage others to reflect on their own behavior. One of Greg's proudest moments came when he was invited to speak at a conference on leadership and empathy. Standing before a packed auditorium, he recounted the events of that fateful flight, admitting his flaws and the shame he had felt in their aftermath. But he also shared the hope and purpose he had found through change, urging his audience to embrace humility and compassion in their own lives. "If there's one thing I've learned," he said, "it's that success isn't measured by how much you earn or how many people know your name. It's about the impact you have on others and the legacy you leave behind. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one conversation to change the course of your life." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Greg didn't feel the rush of ego he once might have. Instead, he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that his story might inspire someone else to make a positive change. As Greg continued his work with his foundation and deepened his relationships with those around him, he often thought about Taylor Swift and the profound effect she had on his life. He sent her a handwritten letter, expressing his gratitude and updating her on the impact of her words. Though he didn't expect a response, the act of writing the letter felt cathartic, a way to close the chapter on the man he had been. To his surprise, Taylor did reply. Her letter was brief but heartfelt, thanking Greg for sharing his story and commending him for his efforts to make a difference. She ended with a simple but powerful message: "Keep going. The world needs more people willing to grow and learn." Greg framed the letter and hung it in his office as a reminder of where he had started and how far he had come. It became a symbol of his commitment to living a life of purpose and integrity, a legacy he hoped would inspire others for years to come. Greg's transformation from a self-centered businessman to a compassionate and mindful individual had become a cornerstone of his life. But what he didn't realize was that the lessons he had learned were only the beginning. Life, he soon discovered, had a way of testing newfound convictions in ways that were both challenging and enlightening. His journey would expand beyond his personal growth, forcing him to confront situations that demanded courage, vulnerability, and, above all, unwavering commitment to his principles. Several years after the infamous flight, Greg had settled into his new role as a philanthropist and advocate for empathy-driven leadership. His foundation had grown, touching thousands of lives through education programs, mentorship initiatives, and community-building projects. His name had become synonymous with second chances, and his story was often shared as an example of how even the most unlikely individuals could change for the better. One summer, Greg was approached by a documentary filmmaker named Elena Martinez. Elena was creating a series about personal transformations, focusing on individuals who had overcome their own biases to create positive change. She wanted to feature Greg's story, not only to highlight his journey, but to explore the broader societal implications of empathy and humility. Initially, Greg was hesitant. While he was comfortable sharing his story in speeches in smaller settings, the idea of being the subject of a documentary felt overwhelming. He worried about being judged, about whether his intentions would be questioned. But after some reflection, he realized that telling his story on a larger scale could inspire others to take their own first steps toward change. The filming process was an intense and deeply introspective experience. Elena and her crew followed Greg for months, capturing his work with the foundation, his interactions with employees, and even quiet moments with his daughter, Emily. They also delved into his past, interviewing former colleagues and acquaintances who painted a vivid picture of the man Greg used to be. Hearing their honest assessments was humbling. Some described him as intimidating and dismissive, while others admitted they had avoided him altogether. One particularly powerful moment occurred during an interview with an old friend, Richard, who had distanced himself from Greg years ago. Richard spoke candidly about their falling out, explaining that Greg's arrogance and lack of empathy had made their friendship untenable. "I never thought he'd change," Richard admitted, "but seeing who he is now, it's like night and day. I'm proud of him, and honestly, I think it's brave to own up to your mistakes like that." The documentary also included an unexpected twist. Elena managed to secure an interview with Taylor Swift. When Greg learned of this, he was both excited and nervous. While they had briefly reconnected at the charity gala, this was the first time her perspective on the flight would be shared publicly. In her interview, Taylor spoke with the same grace and poise that Greg had come to admire. She recounted the incident on the plane, emphasizing the importance of treating others with respect and dignity, regardless of status or appearance. "What stood out to me wasn't just the way he approached me," she said. "It was the way he chose to respond afterward. He could have ignored what happened, but instead, he used it as a turning point. That takes courage, and I respect that." Her words brought tears to Greg's eyes. To hear such kindness from someone he had wronged reminded him of the profound impact that forgiveness and understanding could have. When the documentary premiered, it received widespread acclaim. Critics praised its honest portrayal of human imperfection and its exploration of the power of transformation. Viewers from all over the world reached out to Greg, sharing their own stories of growth and thanking him for being vulnerable. Many said they were inspired to reevaluate their own actions and relationships, proving that the ripple effect of his journey was larger than he could have imagined. But with newfound visibility came new challenges. As Greg's story gained traction, he found himself the target of online criticism from skeptics who questioned his motives. Some accused him of using his foundation as a way to rebuild his public image, while others doubted the authenticity of his transformation. The comments stung, but Greg refused to let them derail his mission. He understood that real change wasn't about pleasing everyone. It was about staying true to his values, even in the face of doubt. This test of resilience deepened his resolve. Greg began addressing criticism head-on, using it as an opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue. He hosted public forums and participated in interviews where he openly discussed his past mistakes and the ongoing nature of personal growth. By acknowledging his imperfections, he disarmed many of his critics and demonstrated that change wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. One unexpected ally during this time was Mia, the young girl Greg had met years earlier through his scholarship program. Now a college student studying creative writing, Mia reached out to Greg with a bold idea. She wanted to co-write a memoir about his journey. Her vision was to create a book that blended Greg's experiences with stories from others who had been impacted by his work. She believed that showcasing a variety of voices would emphasize the collective power of empathy and resilience. Greg was initially hesitant. Writing a memoir felt deeply personal, but Mia's passion convinced him. Over the course of a year, the two worked closely together, conducting interviews, gathering anecdotes, and weaving together a narrative that was both heartfelt and inspiring. The process brought them closer, and Greg came to see Mia as more than just a mentee. She was a partner, a collaborator, and a reminder of why he had embarked on this journey in the first place. When the memoir Ripples of Change was published, it became an instant bestseller. Readers praised its authenticity and the way it highlighted the interconnectedness of human experiences. The book's success led to a nationwide book tour, during which Greg and Mia spoke at schools, libraries, and community centers. Each event reinforced the impact of their work, as attendees shared their own stories of transformation and thanked them for shining a light on the potential for growth. As Greg's life continued to evolve, he found himself reflecting on the broader implications of his journey. He began advocating for systemic changes in industries that often rewarded arrogance and cutthroat behavior. Partnering with other like-minded leaders, he launched initiatives aimed at promoting ethical leadership and fostering inclusive workplace cultures. These efforts sparked important conversations and encouraged businesses to prioritize empathy as a core value. Greg also deepened his connection to his family, particularly Emily. Now a young adult, Emily was forging her own path as an artist, using her creativity to advocate for social justice. She often credited her father's transformation as a source of inspiration, a testament to the power of self-awareness and accountability. Their bond was stronger than ever, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. One of the most profound moments in Greg's journey came during a visit to a small town in the Midwest. He had been invited to speak at a local high school, where many of the students came from underprivileged backgrounds. After his talk, a teenage boy approached him, clutching a worn notebook filled with sketches. "You probably don't remember me," the boy said nervously, "but I was part of one of your foundation's programs a few years ago. Back then, I didn't think I'd ever amount to anything, but your scholarship helped me believe in myself. Now I want to be an artist. This is all thanks to you." Greg was speechless. Looking at the boy's notebook filled with intricate and passionate drawings, he felt a surge of emotion. It was a reminder that every small action, every moment of kindness had the potential to create ripples far beyond what anyone could imagine. As Greg approached the later years of his life, he remained committed to the principles that had guided his transformation. His work, his relationships, and his sense of purpose were all rooted in the belief that change was always possible, no matter how far one had strayed. And while his journey had begun with a single humbling moment on a plane, it had grown into something much greater, a testament to the enduring power of empathy, humility, and the human capacity for redemption. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the man insulting Taylor Swift mid-flight? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.